I work for Vadim. I've been there for something like 1 year and a couple of months. I thought I could start my presentation with telling you what I am going to talk about, but actually, I'd like to first tell you two stories, two short stories. So there's one story about a Joe developer who had a portlet to write, or a couple of portlets to write. It happened something like 3 years ago, and this Joe developer, he was working in a big IT corporation. He had a portlet to write, and he was told to use Spring MVC, pre-market templates, and jQuery on the client side. And there was a team that he was working with. The whole team doesn't work for the company. They left the company after the project was somewhat accepted by the client. And he learned a lot about AJAX development in Liferay environment. So that's the first story, and I'm thinking that I can explain why his experiences were so bad with the particular set of technologies they used at the time. And another story is a story about me. Our key account manager once told me that there are more and more clients coming to our company asking for help with development with their UI for their applications, and the key part is that they want to run their applications as Liferay portlets. And then he always asks, why is that so? And they usually tell that's because you have user management in Liferay portal. That's pretty strange because there is a lot of more things that you can do with Liferay, but usually the customers just ask, want to have the user management enabled by default, and we don't want to develop it. There are also some customers that use Liferay at the moment, and they have it integrated with their single sign-on solutions, so that's why they still want to keep the Liferay part of their application. Okay, so what is the plan for today's presentation? I'd like to tell you what is AJAX about, how you can implement AJAX in a portal environment, then do a quick review of 4 AJAX frameworks that are quite popular today. Then I think I'd like to show you a small demo and summarize everything. And if you have any questions, probably you will, then I'll be trying to answer them. So what is AJAX all about? How many of you use AJAX? Okay, so what are you doing here? You already know your stuff. I mean, probably AJAX is the most single cornerstone of AJAX is XML HTTP request object that was introduced by Microsoft in Internet Explorer. Do you know the benefits for using this API? Come on. Yes, it's asynchronous. You don't need to reload the whole page when something happens with when the user interacts with the page. This also helps you to get the bandwidth that you need for the application down, because you're only transferring chunks of the application, right? So it may also make the application feel more responsive. It is very important for mobile devices that you get to the smallest possible amount of data that you have to transfer, right? Okay, so let's talk about web application architectures in general. We have a Web 1.0 model where you have a client side that is a DOM, document object model, in the browser, and pretty much everything else lives on the server side. So you can have a view, model, and controller on the server side. You have some connection to the database. When the user interacts with the DOM, there are some parameters sent over HTTP request. Those are parsed by the controller. The controller decides what to do with the data that was sent from the browser, and it changes the model. The model can interact with the database, for example, for checking the consistency. And then we generate a view for the action that was performed, and we send a new HTML page over HTTP response, right? The model is slightly complicated by portals that add action and render requests. And with Portal 2.0 specification, you can also have so-called resource requests. Okay, then the AJAX era came, and we started doing rich internet applications. The first approach that was very common and is still is to use so-called fat client approach. So we have the view and the controller on the client side. We have a separate document object model that is connected to the view, and it is manipulated by the view object on the client side. When the user interacts with the DOM, with the browser, this interaction is overtaken by controller. The controller changes the model, and it sends those changes encoded as parameters to the server side. The model interacts with the database. Then there is some data that needs to be sent to the view. So those requested data, for example, when you want to display some data, those requested data are sent back to the browser encoded as an XML or JSON. It can be also raw HTML, doesn't really matter. And then the view part updates the document object model on the client side. But there is also another approach. So you can have the so-called thin client. The thin client works in that way that there's DOM on the browser, document object model, pure HTML, and this DOM is encapsulated with an adapter that overtakes all the communication. So the adapter takes the interaction that the user has with the DOM, sends it to the adapter on the server side over HTTP request, and then the whole logic behind the processing this request is happening on the server side. So the controller takes over, changes the model talks to the database. So then we change the view, and the changes to the view are passed to the adapter, and it's the adapter that sends the information what should be changed in the DOM to the adapter on the client side. And the adapter on the client side takes care of it. So it changes the DOM. And it's all handled by the framework. So you might want to know how to actually do AJAX in Portal. How do you do it? Yes? Okay, so that you just get everything covered by the framework, right? So it's the framework that takes over. But I'm talking about low-level details. So there are actually two ways on the low level. The first one I know about is just use a separate servlet, because portlets are still web applications. So you can have a servlet that is running in the same environment, in the same context. You can have the access to the session and just change things there. So that was the common approach with Portlet 1.0 specification. I don't think there was any other way to do that. With Portlet 2.0, it was very common to use resource requests. So you had to manually build the resource request and then have the AJAX payload sent via this resource request. Okay, so there are very common portal constraints that you need to be aware of when doing AJAX. So the first thing is that you need to take care of the browser-server communication routine. So you need to somehow prepare your payload on the browser, then send it as a resource request to the portal, and then the portal needs to build the response, right? And one bad thing about that is push WebSockets. It's not supported by today standard. The other thing that you need to be aware that's different from regular web applications is your web application, your portal is not alone on the client side. There might be other applications running in the same page, which means you might encounter CSS conflicts, you can encounter JavaScript namespace conflicts, and you can expect that there will be multiple instances of the same framework on one page if you use the same JavaScript framework for a couple of portlets that live on the same page. The other thing is that with regular portlet development, every action causes the page to reload it in the application, right? So the browser needs to do a reload, the full reload. And you need to be aware of that if you have AJAX portlet and non-AJAX portlet on the same page. So your AJAX portlet needs to somehow maintain the state, so that when the browser reloads the page, it is still the same state of the application. And one last, mostly important thing is that most of the frameworks rely on ready events. So it means that when the application, when all the payloads, HTML, JavaScript, CSS, images, when it's downloaded, then the browser fires the ready event that the frameworks use to bootstrap the application. So that means, for example, in Liferay, that your AJAX portlets cannot be AJAXable. Do you know what it means? That the portlet is AJAXable. It means that Liferay first sends all the Chrome or the portal Chrome for your portlets, and then it makes an AJAX request to actually download the contents of the portlet. So when you do an AJAX portlet, you need to be aware of that. Okay, I've already mentioned that there's no out-of-the-box support for push. There are ways to do that, but it's not good to experiment there still. And many of those constraints are going to be fixed with Portal 3.0. I won't mention the details right now. There's a full session devoted to Portal 3.0, so if you're interested, I think you should go there. Okay, and the nice thing about Portal 3.0 specification is that we're part of Java community process. So we're part of it. Okay, so let's do a quick review of AJAX frameworks. How many of you use jQuery or jQuery UI? Lots of you. Did you like it? Somehow. Okay, you have better experiences than I have. So what is jQuery? It's a curated set of user interfaces, interactions, effects like animations, widgets, and themes, CSS themes. It's purely client-side. It's very low-level JavaScript for me. I mean it. It's just manipulating HTML and document object model, or manipulating CSS and attaching to HTML events. There are effects and animations. There's support for AJAX, and there's also support for object serialization to JSON, and there's lots of plugins. So what are the good things about jQuery, in my opinion? It's low level, down to the metal web development. So if you know your stuff, you can do it very easily with AJAX. It's very popular. It has lots of plugins. There is a nice community around it. And it strives to minimize the differences between the browsers, which is really also a nice thing. Anyone doing development for Internet Explorer and other browsers? Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. Okay, but there are some not so good things about jQuery I'd like to mention. There are no tools for structuring your applications in the jQuery itself. You could use, for example, Backbone.js for that, but it's still something different that you need to learn. You're on your own with connecting to the server side, for example, creating resource URLs, if you use Liferay. You're on your own when you need to secure the communication between the client side and the server side. You need to filter the input that the user gives you, and you're going to display it. And it's still low level, down to the metal web development. So you need to know JavaScript, CSS, HTML. Okay, so my experience, it's horrible, and you probably shouldn't do this if you're building a big application. It's okay if you're mostly developing content that needs some additional effects or things like that. But the lack of the structure is very painful, and it's going to hit you. Okay, so about AngularJS. That's also a client-side framework for development for the browser. It comes from Google. It's backed by Google. It allows you to structure your JavaScript and your HTML. It separates concerns with a couple of new concepts. So what are those concepts? Templates. Templates are written with HTML that contains Angular-specific elements and attributes. So Angular combines the template with information from the model and the controller, and it renders the dynamic view that the user sees in the browser. When Angular starts the application, it parses and processes the markup in the template using so-called compiler. And then the loaded transformer and rendered DOM is called the view. So how do we interact with DOM in our templates? We use so-called directives. They apply special behavior to attributes or elements in the HTML. They are markers on a DOM element, something like an attribute or element name, comment, or CSS class that tell AngularJS compiler to attach a specific behavior to that DOM element, or even transform the DOM element and its children. And you should use directives to manipulate the DOM. That says in the AngularJS documentation. Don't try using jQuery, for example, to manipulate the DOM. Use directives. And if you need directives that aren't in the core, you can write your own. The nice thing about AngularJS is it allows for two-way data binding. So it automatically synchronizes the data between the model and the view components. So you can use the model as a single source of your truth. If you have one-way data binding, you just bind the data to the template and then it's gone. You cannot change the data. You need to manually synchronize. But if you use two-way data binding, all the changes to the data in the view are automatically transferred to the models. Okay, so there is a concept of scope. It's an execution context for the expressions that you have in your templates. Those are arranged in hierarchical structure and mimic the DOM structure of your applications. Scopes can watch expressions and propagate events. Then we've got expressions, I've mentioned before. Those are JavaScript-like code snippets that allow to read and write variables. Then we've got the view, which is simply the rendered DOM in the browser. We've got controllers. Those are JavaScript functions that are used to add new features to the scope, and they should contain basic business logic. Event listeners or functions invoked in expressions should be implemented as controller. Then there is dependency injection, so that you don't need to manually create all the objects. There is so-called Injector that takes care of assembling your application on the client side. It uses the well-known pattern, don't call us, we'll call you, right? How many of you use dependency injection on Java? So you know what I'm talking about. Okay. And then there is another concept of module, which contains the different parts of your application, something like controllers, services, directives. And it's recommended to create a module for each feature that you have in your application, each reusable component, like directive, and then an application level module that depends on the other modules and contains an initialization code. There's also a concept of services, which are thought to be used for reusable parts of your business logic. So you end up writing a controller that actually invokes the service. Okay, so what are the good things about AngularJS, in my opinion? It adds a lot of structure and abstraction to your application. It still allows you to touch the DOM, to transform the DOM, to work with the document object model, and it emphasizes the declarative approach. What are the not so good things about AngularJS? It's still down to the metal development for browser. So you still need to know HTML, CSS, JavaScript. And it also mentioned on the latest AngularJS conference, NG Europe, that the next upcoming release, version 2.0, is going to break a lot of stuff. So it's still in the development. Let's talk about Git. How many of you used Git? No one. Almost no one. Okay, so what is Git? Git is actually three things. It's a Java to JavaScript compiler that takes your Java source and produces optimized JavaScript. It's a collection of widgets, so it's a toolkit, as it is in the name. And it's also a set of DOM utilities that allow you to manipulate the DOM. It supports most of the Java language syntax, but there are some differences. Like, for example, you don't get access to 64-bit floating point values in the way that you would get them on Java platform. They are emulated with two numbers. So this causes a different overflow behavior, and the long values are emulated. Okay, it's synchronized. I'm sorry, it's single threaded, so you cannot rely on threads, obviously, because you're in a browser. So all the things related to threads are just gone. And it really supports a small subset of Java runtime environment classes. You need to sometimes use commonly used substitutes for things like formatting or timers. There are also core classes that you use to develop GUID application. Those are UI objects, and all GUID widgets derive from this class. This is a simple wrapper around a DOM element. It supports sizing and styling. A widget is something that extends a UI object, and it supports receiving events. That's the base class for most GUID widgets. And there is a DOM class that you can use to manipulate the document object model. Java's GUID gives you access to the JavaScript itself, or its so-called JavaScript native interface. It abuses the native statement from Java language. It allows you to put the actual JavaScript code in a comment after the declaration of a method. And it also allows you to code the, invoke the JavaScript, compiled JavaScript, something that comes from your Java source code in the JavaScript itself with a specific notation. Okay, it also features so-called override types, which represent the JavaScript objects in your Java code. So you can take an existing JavaScript object and manipulate it with your GUID code. There are a couple of those. For example, things like document, which represents the document object model element document. It allows you to access elements, various subclasses of those elements. And for example, if we want to have an overlay over data object, it's something like that. You just need to extend the JavaScript object, and then you create a bunch of native JavaScript native interface methods around it. Okay, so if you want to create a new GUID widget, you can use composition for that. You can also use extension. So you just use existing GUID widget and just extend it as a class. You can use GUID development mode, which was very praised at the time, but unfortunately it's fading out. So Google is not going to support it anymore. So they came up with GUID super dev mode, which means that every time you reload your page to start debugging, it recompiles the Java sources to JavaScript. So what are the good things about GUID? If you'd like to have it, it allows you for a basic integration with the server side, with its servlet. It supports different backends and transport protocols. And the big thing, it's Java. So you get to use Java tooling. It's really nice to have the Java source coverage tools, JUnit, whatever you use for the server-side development, you can use it for GUID development. There's JavaScript native interface that allows you to integrate with JavaScript, and the JavaScript that is produced by GUID is optimized for modern JavaScript virtual machines, which means it's fast. But there are also not so good things about GUID. The compilation time grows with your application. So if you have an application that has 2,000 views, which happens, it's going to take a while before it compiles. And we had a client that had a GUID application that compiled for an hour or so. And so developing it was a bit painful for them. And it's also important to note that the download time grows with your application. So if you have multiple views in your application, the download time, the startup time for the application will grow. There is a solution for that. You can use so-called code splitting feature of the GUID compiler, but you need to set it up. Okay, and then my favorite part, Vaadin. It's not that I like Vaadin because I work for the company. I used Vaadin before I joined the company, and I must admit that I fell in love with it. Okay, so what's about the name? In Finnish language, Vaadin means female mountain reindeer. It's a user interface for rich web applications. We've got lots of building blocks, lots of widgets that you can use. We're concentrated on two things. We want you to get up and running really quickly and to produce really nice user interfaces with Vaadin. So what's the big part about Vaadin? We're trying to strip the HTML part of web application development. And for example, it is possible to develop such an application with Vaadin. It needs a bit of tweaking the theme for the application, but still, it's possible to mimic iTunes in your browser. We support lots of browsers. i6.7 is not supported anymore with Vaadin 7, but we still do support IE8, which is probably the most important thing about browser support. We do also support latest version of Chrome, Firefox, Opera, and Safari. Our applications can also run on mobile devices. There's lots of additional components available from our directory, which are written by third parties. So we have a community that develops around Vaadin. And you might wonder, so how does it work really? It's a server-side framework. So when you have such a code in your application, that's a Java server-side code that gets executed when the application starts. So we create a text field, we create a button, we add those widgets or components to a layout, and then when the user clicks on the button, we want to show a notification. So when the application starts, we download some assets to the browser. It's usually something like 300 kilobytes, but you can down to even less. And that's pretty much all the application needs to be running in the browser. And then let's say that the user types something into the text field, then clicks on the button. We get a message sent from the browser to the server side. And this message is interpreted by the framework, and it causes the listener on the button to be invoked. So the listener says, show a notification with the name that was put into the input field. So that's what it does. It sends a response that says to the client side, display a notification with the following content. What is nice about Vaadin is that you can pretty much use any language that runs on top of JVM. You don't need browser plugins. You don't need to install anything. We support both servlet and portlet. We do support most of the clouds, anything that runs Java. Come into the development model. You can use whatever IDE you like. You can use Maven with Vaadin. You can use Gravel. You can use Ant. Anything that your Java development environment supports. You can use whatever backends that you like. You can even use Liferay's service builder if you like to. It's a bit more convoluted than it should be, but we're going to work on that. Still, anything Java goes in. What is the future for Vaadin? We're going to introduce a new component, the so-called grid, which is another take on HTML table that allows you lazy loading from the server side, reusing the HTML elements. If you need more details, please go to our site and look it up on the roadmap. So that's for sure. There are probably more features that will come in next Vaadin releases, and Vaadin 8 will going to break some things. We're going to release on relay on Grid 3 and on Java 8. So let me sum it up with some good things about Vaadin. There is no client-side development if you don't need to do that. The communication is provided by the framework. The state is kept on the server side. The business logic is on the server side, so you don't expose the crucial elements of your application to the client side. It's proven to work because the company runs from 2000. The company started in 2000, so it's already almost 15 years. We have a good community around the framework, and there's lots of add-ons in the directory.
Thank you.
Okay. I wanted to mention not so good things about Vadim, but...
Well, you don't have to mention those. We are out of time. So
okay.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry that we don't have any time for questions, but you had questions already on the way. But
yes, if you have any questions, just come to our booth, and I'll be happy to answer them.